The Phantom is a new side-scrolling beat-em-up game similar to Sega Genesis classics such as Golden Axe or the other one. You know, the other one where you kick people. What's that called? What is that game called? Streets of Rage. I just remembered, it's Streets of Rage. Anyway, it's similar to those games, but it's based on a 1936 comic strip called The Phantom, surprisingly. And this time it brings a brand new story, which is approved by the comic's original publisher. It's about a boy turned, I guess you'd call him superhero, called The Phantom, and his partner / love interest, Diana Palmer. And this boy / the Phantom becomes obsessed with taking out pirates, bad pirate guys, because his dad was, well, killed by pirates in the 1700s. I don't know how it works. I don't know the original comic. I don't know. I'd never heard of the comic. Anyway, there's goods and bads here. This is not going to be a straightforward review because it's a little bit more nuanced than just saying this is good, you should buy it, this is bad, you should not buy it. So, yeah, join me as we dive deeper into the game. Let's start with the good points. So, the 2D art is fantastic. It's really the star of the show. It has a great comic book style. You know, it goes picture in picture in the cutscenes. It's really, really well made, and it cannot be faulted. The characters, the animations, they're all top-notch, and it's really high-quality, hand-drawn artwork that belongs in a major studio. And it's no wonder, because the art is animated frame by frame by seasoned comic book artists. So that is one of the major selling points of the Phantom, and you won't be disappointed in that sense. The controls, they're simple, but they're slick and they feel good. To really do damage, you have to work out how to combo your moves and juggle enemies for more damage. That won't be news to anyone who's played like Golden Axe, Streets of Rage. I'm going to keep using those as examples, but, you know, insert side-scrolling beat-em-up here. There's another side to this, which we'll deal with later, but for now, just know that the controls are good, and they're what you would expect from a good premium game. The difficulty. Now, the Phantom is quite intense, and it really is as difficult as some of the Genesis classics. For me, it's refreshing to see a game that has a good challenge to it and doesn't hold your hand in the modern day. It kind of just gets you into the game, you know what you're doing, and you just go. There is a flip side to this, again, which I will talk about in a little while, and this is why things with the Phantom are not straightforward. But speaking of games that, you know, the classic Genesis beat-em-up games and on, it is really nice to see a modern take on the beat-em-up side-scrolling genre that isn't just a straight rip-off of those games. It has these cool comic book stylings of something like comics, if anyone remembers that. And there are different locations, and the game plays out largely as a traditional side-scrolling beat-em-up, but it's interspersed with mini-game sequences. Like, there's a point where you chase a plane while riding a horse and shooting at a bad guy who's chucking boxes at you. It's nice. It's nice to kind of have that more old-school feel, but original. It's not just copying all of those games we just talked about. Now, one thing that's meh, so we're going to move on to the meh. There's one bullet point here for meh, which is in the middle of good and bad. And that is the voice acting. It's a real mixed bag. Some of the side characters' voice actors are great, and they really kind of add to this comic book immersion in cutscenes. You can really tell that they're experienced. But some of them are also pretty bad. And unfortunately, most notably in this category of being bad is the Phantom himself, which, considering he's the main character, is a bit of a bummer. The best way to judge this is by checking out the intro video, which I'll show you now.
A father sacrificed his own life to save his son. A sole survivor washed ashore. The young boy was nursed to health and swore an oath. I swear to devote my life to the destruction of all forms of piracy, greed, and cruelty. May my sons and their sons follow me. This is the legacy of my family. I am the Phantom.
So, yeah. Well, let's move on to the bad. The concept of the game, like being very particular about hating pirates is just a strange choice, and makes for a bit of a cheesy and kind of off-kilter narrative. It's an original but weird concept, and this is where things get a little bit murky, and it just has this the Phantom has this hatred for piracy, and not like villains in general. It seems like really hyper focused on pirates being the bad guys, and this isn't the fault of the game per se. You know, it's more of a criticism of the source material that it has to work with. But, you know, it makes the foundations of the game, so we have to mention it. It's just a little bit strange. Now, I also ran into a few glitches in my review copy. One time I tried to smash a gasoline can, and it made my animation get stuck until the enemies killed me, and I respawned because I couldn't do any fight moves or combat. I was stuck in like this animation, and I was just able to kind of wander around the level, you know. And that wasn't the only time something like that happened. It happened a couple of times where I got to a part that basically you either have to die or restart the stage, and it's frustrating. There's also just weirdly janky parts, like in the first level, which is a cave. You reach the end of the cave because it's a side scroller, right? And you save someone, but then he kind of gets up, and you're like, oh, okay. And what you have to do is backtrack to basically the start of the cave again, which is very strange game design, and also doesn't make sense. Like, you know, in like Streets of Rage, wherever it flashes up, being like blah 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 in the top right, saying like move on to the next area, like keep scrolling, idiot. It doesn't do that in the Phantom, and so I was just like wandering around for a couple of minutes, just like, why is the game broken? Is it a glitch? Because you save this guy, then he just stands there and no enemies appear or anything. I'm like trying to go right because it's not obvious that the cave ends there, by the way. So I'm like, why can't I? And it turns out you actually then have to go left for a little while before enemies start appearing, and then you go back out the entrance of the cave, which is not really intuitive. It's just strange. It does, yeah. The game doesn't point that out, and going along with this is kind of like the difficulty pacing is a bit off. Like in this sequence where you go back out through the cave in the first level, it then throws a horde of bad guys at you, and not one but two of these kind of big guys that take a lot to kill. So like each of these big guys takes a lot to fight. You know, you have to punch them, then they fall over, and then they get up, and you punch them, and they fall over and get up. But then there's guys throwing knives at you, and it's just there's this big onslaught, and then you in this big onslaught is two of these big guys who keep getting up, and you have to keep, and it's it becomes all of a sudden very difficult. And this is in the first like 15 minutes of the game, right? 10 minutes. I mean, it's quite full on. It's a sudden spike, and you're like, oh, okay. I mean, and this is where the kind of what I was talking about earlier, where it's nice to have a challenging game that doesn't hold your hand, but when these spikes of difficulty come, it kind of slaps you in the face, and you're like, whoa, hold on. I mean, it's a bit too much to have, like, you know, a horde of people and two big guys when I'm just trying to work out how to get out of the cave. Going along with that, again, is that there's no tutorial. There is a controls screen that you can like press start and go to the look at controls, but there isn't an explanation of how the game mechanics work with regards to ultimates and special abilities. For example, I had to just learn that if you press left button, a wolf turns up and bites someone and runs off. And I'm still not sure if that's an alt or a special ability or what. There's no explanation of the meters that at the top of your screen that fill up and what they do. Like, I mean, logic says they're for alts and special abilities, but, you know, when the wolf turns up, I'm like, I don't think he's actually using that special meter. So it's like, the game does not take the time. And this is where the yin and the yang of the difficulty and everything comes in, where it's like, it's nice that the game just throws you in, you get playing, but it probably should have eased you in with, like, the first 2 minutes saying, like, all right, now press your alt to fight this guy. And, just explaining outlining the basics, because it is very full on. Another con is that there are only 14 levels, with each level being fairly short, depending on how many times you have to start over due to the difficulty. These levels are varied, and you kind of find yourself all over the world and things like that, and with new enemies. So it's nice, it's good, it's varied, it's not all the same thing. But we're talking, if there's 14 levels, we're talking a kind of handful of hours to really sink your teeth into before the game is over. And in this respect, again, it's very similar to one of the classic Genesis games where, they're not actually that long. They're just difficult in places. Which goes, it's par for the course for this genre, but it's something that still needs pointing out if you're going to spend your money on it. I guess the last point for it being negative point is that the story does pull you around all over the place at breakneck speed, and it would have been good to have a lair or somewhere to kind of hang around between missions to make it feel more connected, because you find yourself traveling to new countries and locations, and it's overwhelming. Again, it brings us back to pacing, where it's just strangely paced, like you don't get a breath in a bad way, like you want to kind of get a little bit of okay, before the next mission, let's just head back to the lair. Let me, or something like that. It's like you end the mission. There's a crazy 30-second cutscene where like bam, 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 all these new enemies, bad guys are introduced. We got to go here, and then it's like you fly there, and then you're all of a sudden side-scrolling and fighting new people, and you're like, whoa! It's just you just need that little bit more context. It just feels a little bit out of place. The Phantom is at its best when it's being a comic book, which isn't surprising given its roots. The handcrafted artwork in the game is phenomenal, and that carries over to the cutscenes, which are fantastic to watch. Uneven voice acting, however, does rear its ugly head, and this is where the cracks show through the otherwise premium veneer of this beat-em-up game. While slick, the controls are not explained very well, and difficulty spikes in the game's pacing mean that you'll find yourself combating extremely tough enemies from the first level. Speaking of pacing, the story plays out at such a speed that you'll often feel disconnected with the events of the game, which are explained in a quick 30-second cutscene as you move between locations. During my playthrough, I also encountered a couple of bugs that caused me to lose progress to reset them, but as I was given preview code, I understand the team are still working hard on patches, but it's something to bear in mind because nobody can predict what will happen. Those criticisms aside, the Phantom is otherwise a good side-scrolling beat-em-up game with a unique concept. Playing the game feels very much like you're discovering one of the Sega Genesis classics like Streets of Rage or Golden Axe again, rather than just feeling like you're playing an imitation. If you're someone who craves an original take on the genre, and you've listened to my criticisms and don't mind them, then I can recommend buying The Phantom right now. If you're more on the fence about the game, then I recommend waiting to ensure that the bugs are ironed out. Regardless of which camp you fall into, one thing is for sure, you won't be disappointed with The Phantom's jaw-dropping artwork.